Okay, 17.6, starting our section on amphibians. Amphibian, if we say it's an amphibious vehicle, you know, like the Army will have an amphibious vehicle, what does that mean?
I think it means that it can go in land and on the water.
Yeah, you can drive it on land, and then you can just drive it right in the water and use it in water, like a boat. We have land and water both. So this is going to be an animal that spends part of its life on land, part of it in the water. So in that section of your book, you have Apida, which is this first one, and you have this creature right there that is an example of that, and it has no legs. It's not. It kind of looks like an elongated roly-poly, doesn't it? But it has no legs. Okay. But it is amphibious. It lives part of its life on land, part of it in water. And we'll look at some examples of animals that you know about that spend part of their life on land, part of it in the water. So this creature, that's its name right there. The next one is Chordata. And in your notes, which is on the bottom, I think page 6 is where it talks about this. There is a blank in your notes that it's kind of hard to figure out what do I need to put in that spot. And I think it's the second bullet from the bottom. It says order, and then it should be Chordata, and then I think it should be salamander should be in the next one, and then cross out the word they. It makes no sense with having a they there. But these have a tail. They kind of have a tail throughout their entire life. Last night I watched a little video clip that just popped up in, I think it was, I don't know, was it YouTube or was it some other website that I was at? But it showed in 6 minutes the entire life of a salamander before it hatches. In other words, starting out with actually a single egg. It shows it starting out with a single egg, then dividing into two cells, and then going on like that until it is a salamander that hatches. Now, salamanders at that point have no legs. They're kind of like if you've ever seen a tadpole, you know how it has the front part of the body and then has just a long tail after it. They kind of do that same thing as well. When we lived in Montana, we had lots of salamanders there. I think they're not all that good looking animals as far as I'm concerned. They were cold and clammy, but many of these animals do us a great service by killing all the pests that we have around. Yes, do they get them all? No, they don't get them all, but they have plenty of food to eat. Okay, so the salamanders fit into this Chordata, and they will grow legs later on in their life. At first, they have gills. As an adult, they have lungs, kind of like frogs do. Okay, now then we have Anura. These are without a tail. Like the last one had a tail. These, in their adult, don't have a tail. Like frogs and toads, both fit into this one. This kind of shows the metamorphosis. Meta means to change, form, and when the frog hatches out, it has a pretty plump little body with a tail after it, and it swims around in the water, and it has gills. Not external gills, it has internal gills. And then as it matures, keeps getting bigger, the body gets considerably bigger, and eventually it will grow legs, first the back legs, then the front legs, and then as it continues to grow, it will actually absorb. In other words, a process, remember we talked about catabolism, anabolism? It will actually destroy the tissue inside of here to help grow the legs and more of its body. So it's going to recycle its body materials, and eventually, here's a frog that's pretty far along, still has a little bit of tail, and eventually it will absorb that whole tail and have no tail at all. So when we do our frog dissection, you're going to have the ones, but they're mature enough that they have no tail. So they have kind of like a double life. They have a tadpole stage where they have no legs and they have gills, and then in an adult they have legs and no tail, and they don't get their respiration through gills. They now develop lungs. Okay, so somewhere in between, they're having both. One's being converted into the other. The skin of amphibians is nice and smooth. I don't know if you've ever caught a frog. You probably know how nice and smooth, and they don't have any scales on the outside like that we always talk about reptiles having. They do have those specialized cells that have color in it. So now usually when you find frogs and bullfrogs and around our area, they're kind of a greenish brown color, and they have different patches of lighter and darker, and so they have pretty good camouflage. They can hide. Now, the skin, though, has a very rich supply of blood vessels, and since it does have such a very rich supply of blood vessels, its skin can actually help them take oxygen out of the air or water. So in other words, it's part of their respiratory system is actually their skin. We don't benefit from that, but they do. So their respiration is, yes, they have gills. Some have it their entire lifetime, some only in the early stages. Some only have lungs, or like in the frog, they will lose their gills and develop lungs. Their skin also, as I said, has the ability to carry on respiration, get oxygen. That's one of the ways that they do get their oxygen when they're hibernating in winter. With it being that cold, their body doesn't need a lot of oxygen, and so there's enough coming in through their skin to keep them alive without having to breathe. So they don't have to go to the surface every once in a while like frogs typically do, because they can get enough of it through their skin. The other thing they say is inside their mouth and their throat are so many blood vessels as well that when they have their mouth open, they also are getting oxygen in that way. So their whole outside of their body does serve to help get oxygen into their body. Now, the larval form of the salamander does have gills. So this little salamander I saw that hatched out had these little finger-like things that stuck out there that are its gills. And then as it goes through metamorphosis, it'll lose those gills and the lungs will develop in its chest. Now, how many chambered heart did a fish have? It had a two-chambered heart. It had an atrium and a ventricle. The amphibians have a three-chambered heart. They have two atria, but only one ventricle, and that's a benefit. They can kind of separate their blood flow into two areas by doing it that way, but it's not completely separated because they only have one ventricle. So they have kind of like this additional loop where the blood is getting oxygen like from their lungs or from their gills, depending on what part of their life cycle. So this would be like a fish. Remember, it had a two-chambered heart, and it goes by the gills and then straight out to the body, and then back to the heart again. So there's the atrium, there's the ventricle. And that would be the body organ. But see, like it just has one circle, one circuit, whatever you want to call it. The amphibian, on the other hand, has two loops. This is the body circuit, in other words, all the organs and stuff like that. But this is the part that has to do with the lungs. So notice that it's separate from this one. So blood will leave the heart and go out to the lungs, but when it comes back from the lungs, it's mixed with blood that hasn't gone from the lungs, so it's not, as efficient as our system will, because we have two halves. Like, we have an atrium and ventricle that work to get blood to the lungs. Then when it comes back from the lungs, we have another atrium and ventricle that pumps it out to the body. So we keep the two halves separate. Here you can see that it's getting mixed in between here. So the blood isn't as oxygenated. They will, tire easier because the blood doesn't have as much oxygen as you think. So they have two atria and one ventricle. So that's a respiratory organ, which could be either the lungs or their gills. And then there's the organs of the body that need this oxygen. Okay, so amphibians, like frogs and salamanders, are ectotherms. What does that mean again? We had that early in this chapter. What is an ectotherm?
They get heat from outside, so they're cold blood.
Okay, so they take on the body temperature of their surroundings. They have no way of generating body heat. So whatever the temperature is on the outside, they take on that temperature. If it's hot, they take on the temperature that's hot. In fact, you probably heard this thing, like if you put a frog into boiling water, he'll jump right out because it's hot. But if you put a frog into water and slowly raise it up to the boiling point, will it jump out? Nope. Till finally it's cooked. So and if you think about it, usually you sense changes in the temperature, not the temperature. Like if you've gone from a room that's cold into here, you might think this room is hot, or reverse. If we're in a room that was warmer than normal, and you go into another room, you might think it feels cold. But if you go into another room that's the same temperature, you don't feel that effect. Oh, it feels the same. Well, I don't feel hot or cold, so it must be the same. So ectotherm. Now, here are two words that kind of go with them. It's called hibernation and estivation. What's the difference between hibernation and estivation? Gone that far in your notes? What's the difference between hibernation and estivation? Anyone? I'll let you look in your notes to find it, if you can find it. Okay, Landon, what's the difference?
When the temperature gets cold, it's hibernation.
Okay, so hibernation is usually when it's getting cold, and like for instance frogs, they will go down to the bottom of the pond, sometimes bury themselves kind of in the mud, and just stay there during the cold time. Okay, so their body, their heart rate goes way down because they're not exercising, they're not moving. They're just keeping them. They have like on a maintenance survival. They're just keeping the organs alive till the things get warmer. Then what's estivation then?
Does it happen do they do pretty much the same thing when it gets hot?
Yeah, when it gets hot, they stop becoming active and they just kind of hang out until it isn't so hot. That's estivation. So one's when it's hot, and one's when it's cold. It's the only difference between hibernation and estivation. Okay, the frogs and toads we said were the Anura. Now let's talk a little bit about the structures of a frog. The first thing is we want to point out about the frog is they have a nictitating membrane. Okay, you have an eyelid that closes, right? Now, you may have seen cartoons where they drew a frog with eyelids, but frogs don't have eyelids. They don't have eyelids. But what they do have is they have a clear membrane that kind of rests down here, and they can move that up over their eye. But as you can see, it is clear, so they can see through it, but maybe not as good as if it's all the way down. So that's one thing that they have that's different, is that they have that ability. Fish don't need that. They need that because they live where? When would they need that most? Why? Why do you think in the water?
Well, I don't know. There might be something in the water. I don't know.
Okay, now I think maybe that were true in the water, but it's primarily needed when they're on land, because why do you blink anyway?
So I get dry.
Your eyes get dry, so that'd be the same thing. They can use that to moisten their eye, kind of like we do. We blink our eyes to keep our eyes. So it's more for land, but I'm sure your idea is probably what they do sometimes. You know, if it's irritating, kind of close their eye. There are other animals that we will talk about that have something similar to that. Some of you may have seen like birds of prey, like a hawk or an eagle. They will have one of those too. So it's not limited to just frogs. They have a tympanic membrane. What's that? Anybody know what a tympanic membrane is? Well, in orchestras, they have these big things that look like kettles with skin over the top of it, right? And we call them timpanis, or the name that people who play them don't like them called kettle drums, but they're timpanis. Okay, so this is a membrane that can vibrate. So what do you think it has something to do with? Yeah, hearing. It has to do with hearing. Now, what do you notice about their ear that's different than our ear?
It's
A perfect circle. Ours is pretty round too, but you don't see that. This is like their eardrum. This part of our ear, they don't have. That would be kind of a nuisance to them, wouldn't it? When you're swimming through the water, these things would create friction as you're moving forward. And the interesting thing about your ears, do they work better in air or when you're underwater? They work much better in air, right? So we have our ears set up to work in air. What do you think about theirs? They're amphibians, so what do you think? They work both ways. When they're in the water, sound traveling through the water hits this, and they can hear in water very well. And when they're in the air, sound traveling through the air will hit it. So this setup allows them to be able to hear well in air and in water. So they can hear well both ways. Whereas for us, once you get down the water, you don't hear as well. But because ours is really, God made ours to be in the air. We're going to spend most of the time in the air. If we're in the water, it's by choice usually, not because that's where we won't plan on living. So when we dissect our frog, these are some of the structures that you're going to see on the inside of your frog. The reason why I like to dissect the frog is many of the organs in their body are located in the same places that they are in our body. Okay? They have much of the same layout. Obviously, difference in sizes maybe, but where you find them is much the same. Now, this is one thing that is different about them, is they have a common passageway for digestion. In other words, we have an anus, they have this. But it's also an excretory organ, okay? Where we urinate is different than where we defecate. They put both of those at the same spot. And also reproductive, okay? Producing the gametes. Comes out of the same opening. So they have one opening that serves the same purpose for all of them. And which is located, well, you can't quite see it as well in this picture, but it's right down here is where that opening is. Now, when you look inside of your frog, you're going to find a lot of these, they look like really thin skin, and that really thin skin is called mesentery. You have that in your body. And it is, as it says up here, attaches your organs to the wall of your body so that they stay in place. So that when you're jumping around, your organs aren't just flopping around inside your body, or when you roll over, you get them twisted up. They twist with your body as you spin. So the mesentery is trying to just keep all the organs in position so they can all function properly. That's their main job, is just to hold things in place. And you will see that when you open up your frog. It might somehow, it's easy to cut through those with your scalpel, or even with that dissecting needle. You can kind of pull on it and pull it apart. And you can pull all the organs out so you can look at them in more detail. So they have this membrane that holds things in place. Okay, reproduction. The frogs are oviparous. Okay, what was that again? We had that in our last assignment. What did it mean to be oviparous? They laid eggs and they hatch, right? Now, they do have, as we learned earlier, no, we haven't covered that yet. They have external fertilization. We just have it right now. External fertilization. The female will lay eggs, and the male will dump sperm on it. And you're dismissed.